When the rescue team opened the black box from the highway collision on Route 12 2 months ago, they had no idea the retrieved data would contain information about a journey that had vanished since the year 1983. The school bus carrying 9 students who were the last to leave an extracurricular outing in the Venton Mountains of Oregon. The black box belonged to a modern cargo truck registered in the year 2022, with no history of major repairs or GPS component replacements. Yet the data recovered from its temporary memory showed a short journey, 42 minutes of travel along the Ridgeline Pass, matching exactly, meter by meter, the intended route of the Redwood Pines Middle School bus, the vehicle that completely disappeared on November 17, 1983, and was never found. No one could understand why a modern vehicle would contain movement data from a vehicle that had gone missing 40 years ago. There was no crash, no witnesses, no emergency call. That trip was reported as never arriving. And the children on board, most of them between 12 and 13 years old, never came back. The incident was once concluded to be a terrain-related accident, but there were no signs of overturning. No debris, no recorded distress signals of any kind. The case file was closed in the year 1987, after 4 years with no new leads. But that black box reopened everything. And for the first time in 4 decades, the names of those children were spoken again, one by one in order, as if someone were deliberately leaving a sign. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow the trail of forgotten disappearances, because there are names that have never been called again. The extracurricular outing took place on Thursday, November 17, 1983, Redwood Pines. Middle school organized a one-day field trip to the Venton Mountain Ecological Reserve, located approximately 70 kilometers northeast of the school. As a small school with modestly sized classes, the entire 7th and 8th grades were divided into 2 travel groups, each transported by a separate bus. In the morning, the 2 buses departed from the school at 7:15. According to schedule, the students were to arrive at the Aster Ridge Ecological Station around 9 in the morning. The weather that day was recorded as mildly cold, clear skies, no snow. Both buses arrived on time. The field trip ended at 4:30 in the afternoon as planned. The first group, consisting of about 20 students and 2 teachers, left the camp at 5 o'clock, returning via the main forest route through Ridgeline Pass, and reached the school at 6:20, 10 minutes behind schedule due to a stretch of light fog. But the second bus, scheduled to depart at 5:20, never returned. According to the internal report from that year, the bus was a Bluebird model. Registration number RWP-0835, driven by a man named Marlon Deek. It was confirmed to have departed Aster Ridge Station at 5:23. There were 9 students on board with no teacher accompanying them, as both primary supervisors had ridden the first bus. This arrangement had been approved in advance since the students in question were mostly children of local staff and familiar with the route. The return journey to school typically lasted around 1 hour and 15 minutes. In theory, the second bus would have arrived back around 6:40. But starting from 6:30 onward, no one received any further contact from the driver or the students. No phone calls, no reports of traffic, no police records of a stopped or lost vehicle along the return route. The last known sighting of the bus was at the turnoff from Aster Ridge Station, when a park security guard waved to the driver. He later reported that the bus turned in the correct direction, southbound onto the road leading toward Ridgeline Pass. By then, the sky had begun to dim, with the sun setting low behind the mountain peaks. Not long after, in the town of Halverside, the final major junction before descending from the mountain, traffic cameras showed no record of any school bus passing through. Police were alerted at 7:15 when a parent arrived at the school to pick up their child but found no one there. The school called the lead driver. No one answered. All attempts to make contact failed. By 8 o'clock, the first search team was deployed from the Benton County Sheriff's Department. They followed the primary route, from Aster Ridge to Ridgeline Pass, then through the 3 main forks leading down to the lowlands. No signs of a crash, no vehicle off the road, no incidents were found. At every gas station and roadside diner, no one reported seeing a yellow Bluebird school bus pass by during the window of interest. The next morning, the search area was expanded to 4 kilometers on either side of the main road. Helicopters were brought in, but despite sweeping the region for 3 full days, no unusual tire tracks were found leading away from the asphalt. No brake marks, no shards of broken glass, no skid trails in the gravel. Only the cold silence of November draped over the pine forest. By the 5th day, the search expanded to the smaller side roads. Some dirt paths leading into old logging sites were also inspected, but these routes were either locked by gates or too rough for a full-sized bus. None showed any evidence that a vehicle had passed through within the previous 72 hours. The vehicle's navigation system, a rudimentary device in that era, was unable to transmit data as satellite coverage was not yet widespread. Therefore, no GPS signals could be retrieved. The black box, if it had recorded audio or coordinates, was not designed to transmit information in real time. On November 25th, after 8 days of searching, police issued a public notice. The bus and the 9 students were officially recorded as missing during an incomplete journey. The driver, Marlon Deek, 38 years old, had no history of fleeing or abnormal behavior. No evidence of foul play or conflict between the students and the driver was discovered. This was not the first disappearance to occur on Ridgeline Pass, but it was the first to leave no trace at all. Since then, the road has remained in use with vehicles traveling it every day, but the Bluebird bus RWP-0835 and the 9 students aboard seem to have been erased from the map, right in the middle of the most familiar route. Among the 9 students on the last bus that left Aster Ridge Camp that afternoon, the name most frequently mentioned in the years that followed was Ionie Talbert, a 13-year-old girl with shoulder-length curly hair, often carrying a small purple leather-bound notebook. Ionie was a student of Class 8B, the only daughter of a family that had migrated from Montana, having moved to the town of Redwood Pines less than a year previous. She had a quiet, reserved nature, but once silenced the entire class when she read aloud a passage from her personal journal during a literature lesson, a memory of someone who could no longer remember where their home was, only recognizing it by the scent of rotting wood before the rain. Her homeroom teacher that year, Mrs. Lariah Friends, described Ionie as the kind of student you only realize was there when she's not, never loud but leaving a distinct quiet in her absence. Before the field trip, Mrs. Friends had handwritten a personal note inside Ionie's notebook. Don't forget that what you write can be held by others but not always understood. Ionie had pasted that slip of paper onto the inside cover. Mrs. Friends only learned this later, when Ionie's mother handed her a photocopy of the notebook, the original having gone with the girl that afternoon and never returned. In her notebook, Ionie often drew small maps of places she had passed, the wooden bridge at the edge of the schoolyard, the bend in the road with a misspelled sign near the old church, the forest path where 2 pine trees grew diagonally across each other to form an X. The striking detail was no one had taught Ionie how to draw maps. She taught herself, marked the paths on her own, and never used official names. In the final pages of the notebook, the portion that had been photocopied before her disappearance, there was one page with only 3 lines. Not every place wants to be found. Some fade so no one comes back, but if you must go, go when the light falls behind the trees. No one in the family knew Ionie had written those words. She had no siblings and no clearly close friends. But one student who had often shared a bus seat with her on field trips was Dannel Vireo, a boy of 12 and a half, small for his age, often mistaken for a younger grade. Dannel was the youngest of 3 brothers. His father worked as a technician at the local weather station. His mother was a librarian. He was often described as having an uncanny memory, able to recall license plates, radio jingle lyrics, and even the number of steps from the school gate to his classroom. The PE teacher once said Dannel never ran fast, but always knew exactly how many meters remained to the finish line, even when no markings were visible. That afternoon, Dannel was believed to be seated 2 rows behind Ionie. He carried with him a small handheld tape recorder, a birthday gift from his father 3 weeks earlier. He recorded everything: birdsong, the sound of footsteps on gravel, and even the bus door closing. No one knows whether that recorder was running during the final trip, and to this day it has never been found. Neither student left behind many photographs. The school had no digital camera that year. The last class photo shows them in the back row, blurry sunlight slanting through the window, making their faces hard to discern. But Mrs. Friend still remembers. She recalled that on the day of the field trip, Ionie was the last to board the bus after circling back to pick up a handkerchief left on the ground. As she stepped on, she paused for a second, looking out the rear window, toward the pine ridge sloping down the mountain. That look, the teacher said, was like someone trying to memorize one last time something about to disappear. There was one small detail she could never stop thinking about. A few weeks before the trip, Dannel had asked her whether a road could change its location after it rained. She had only laughed at the time, but later, when the case became an unsolved mystery, that question felt like a crack opening onto something that had never been named. In the first 3 days after the disappearance, the entire search and rescue force of Benton County was mobilized. A temporary command post was set up in the parking lot of the Aster Ridge Ecological Station, right where the bus had been confirmed to depart at 5:23 in the afternoon on November 17th. At the time, the leading hypothesis was that the bus had encountered a terrain-related accident, fallen into a ravine, or veered off the main road due to fog or a steering error. But the problem was, the Ridgeline pass route the bus was expected to take had no section steep or hazardous enough to vanish without a trace. It was a 26-kilometer stretch through forest, equipped with steel guardrails at sharp turns and cliffs. Any crash would have left signs: debris, tire marks, scrapes on trees. On the first day, search teams focused on the 3 spots most prone to accidents, including Turn 7 near Romer Lake, where a vehicle had once skidded off in 1976. But aerial sweeps by helicopter revealed no foreign objects, no disturbance in the vegetation. Traffic cameras and weather stations along the route did not record any school bus passing through. The first mistake occurred the very next morning. Search teams had not been informed that the second bus left camp 20 minutes later than scheduled. This led them to miscalculate the time frame of disappearance, causing them to overlook the period when the bus might have mistakenly turned onto an unblocked side path. The second mistake involved the use of outdated topographic maps. Some printed copies still marked old logging roads from the 1960s, even though those paths had long been abandoned and were no longer part of the official road system. One rescue team reported finding faint tire marks on a dirt path heading south, but was not permitted to investigate further because the road was deemed too narrow for a school bus. On the afternoon of the third day, search operations were suspended due to heavy rain. By the fourth morning, when the weather cleared, many of the initial traces had already been washed away. The Oregon State Patrol suggested expanding the search into the northern forest, but the proposal was denied due to lack of personnel. On the fifth day, a civilian reconnaissance aircraft spotted a strange 6-meter-long streak on a hillside northwest of Silver Cap Lake, resembling something left by a set of tires. But since the area lay outside the 10-kilometer radius of the intended route, the report was not prioritized. By the time an independent team reached the site on the 8th day, there was nothing significant left to examine. One detail forgotten for many years was Dannel's tape recorder. His mother had informed police that he brought it along that day and knew very well how to use it. But no one asked the family to provide old recordings, nor is there any record showing the device was ever sought as important evidence. The reason? Authorities assumed that device couldn't have remained operational if it disappeared with the bus. Around the same time, the records of driver Marlon Deek were reviewed. He had no criminal record, had 11 years of experience driving for the school, and had once been commended for avoiding a collision during a skid incident in 1980. There was no indication he had any motive to leave the main route. However, an internal report from 1982, 1 year before the incident, stated that he had previously complained about some old forest turnoffs not being remarked after the signage system was updated. It's unclear how the report was handled, as the original copy was no longer in the file. Another oversight lay in the check-in procedure. According to a staff member at the ecological camp, the group of students boarding the bus was not checked by name before departure. Instead, they were allowed to board freely as only a few students remained. This meant the original list was never cross-verified, and one possibility was raised: that a student may not have boarded the bus after all, or that there was a 10th person. That theory was quickly dismissed as no additional students were reported missing. But later, when the case was reopened, many came to see this as the largest blind spot in the entire investigation. In the end, with no physical evidence or new witnesses, the case was reclassified as missing without a trace. In 1987, the file was officially closed with a chilling final note: Bus RWP-08359, 9 students, 1 driver, journey incomplete, no further traceable lead. But after all the maps, reports, and missed conversations, what remained was the silence of questions never asked more closely. Each year on November 17th, Mrs. Tasya Talbert still places a small purple cloth on the windowsill, the same fabric her daughter Ionie once used to wrap her notebook. The first cloth was placed exactly 1 week after the disappearance. The following year, another. Then 10 years, then 20, then 30. Until that windowsill became a quiet streak of color no one asked about anymore. After 1987, when the case file was officially closed, most families were invited to receive a copy of the investigation, 64 pages long, detailing the routes searched, the timeline of the missing persons report, and the topographic distribution maps. But in those copies, not a single line spoke of sleepless nights, of doors never knocked, or of the sound of a bus that never returned. Dannel's father, Mr. Luis Vireo, held onto a habit no one could dissuade. Every Sunday morning he would drive up Ridgeline Pass, park at the final overlook toward the valley, and sit silently for exactly 42 minutes. The same duration as the missing journey. Once, when asked why he did it, he simply replied, "So that if someone's still traveling, they know someone's waiting at the end." The Vireo family never replaced their front door. The handle still bore a small dent left by Dannel at age 10 when he slammed the door too hard. Inside, the boy's small dining chair was kept but never sat upon. It was left slightly ajar from the table, as if someone might still return. For the others, the ways of coping differed. Some families chose to leave Redwood Pines after 2 or 3 years. Others tried to hold on to something by keeping their child's room unchanged, by avoiding their name, or by attending every hearing even when there was nothing left to hear. The school community changed too. Mrs. Lariah Friends, Ionie's homeroom teacher, retired from teaching in the spring of 1984. No specific reason was known, only that she moved to a small coastal town and never gave interviews again. The camp supervisor that day, Mr. Clint Marrow, was once criticized for allowing a group of students to leave without a teacher, but verification records showed that the decision had been pre-approved by the principal. Still, Mr. Marrow carried that sense of responsibility as part of himself. Later, during a former staff gathering, he quietly told the person next to him, "I don't recall every face, but I remember one arm waving through the window, slower than usual." Another haunting detail was the final attendance log from that day. At the school, the duty officer noted the first bus returned on time. Then the line Bus 2, not yet arrived, was crossed out in red ink. And beneath it, no one ever wrote anything else. That list is still kept in the records archive. The paper has yellowed, the ink faded. But that red stroke, it never blurred. Nearly 20 years later, a local resident named Reza Dunn once organized a small memorial on November 17th. At the time, she was only 24 and had been a first grader when the incident occurred. She shared that her mother never let her ride the bus afterward. No explanation, no prohibition, just always picked her up herself. Only 6 people attended the memorial, not because the community had forgotten, but because no one wanted to do anything that might make those left behind remember even more. The case slowly became something unspoken, not from indifference, but because no words were ever enough. Yet some could not stop remembering. In the local records room, an employee named Calvin Rouse once kept a map pinned behind a curtain. The 1983 route map, with 8 turns marked by red pins and one small spot in the corner, unnamed, labeled only, possible. He once said in an unaired interview, "I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for anymore. But I do know. No one just vanishes into thin air." On April 12, 2023, a minor accident occurred on Interstate 12, nearly 80 kilometers south of the town of Redwood Pines. A truck transporting frozen food lost control in the rain, skidded onto the grass shoulder, and overturned. The driver sustained only minor injuries, but because the vehicle was a modern model equipped with a black box recording detailed travel logs, the traffic investigation team retrieved the device to analyze the cause. 3 weeks later, a technician named Riley Umber discovered something unusual. The travel data contained a 42-minute segment that did not match any known route the truck had ever traveled. That data segment simulated a winding road through mountainous forest, recorded at an undetermined time. No date, no satellite signals for confirmation. Only raw coordinate format, elevation, and velocity minute by minute. And what led Umber to report it to his superiors was this. The journey ended at a coordinate that exactly matched the final point marked on the search map of the missing school bus case from 1983, an unnamed turnoff that had once been removed from official maps due to a printing error. After verification, the information was immediately forwarded to the Benton County Records Office. There, Calvin Rouse, who had kept the nameless map behind a curtain for over 30 years, was the first to confirm. "This is a route that was never recorded in actual data, and it's also the last route I ever suspected." A cross-check investigation was launched. They discovered that the microprocessor used in the accident truck, though modern, had been installed from a batch of recycled components. The component batch code traced back to an electronic storage facility shut down in 2015. From there, it was found that some cache memory units from old vehicles had been dismantled and sold as electronic scrap not fully erased. A technician at the component handling company, who requested anonymity, admitted, "Some old vehicle memories, if not deeply wiped, can retain segments of journeys. Even without dates, terrain data remains. It's possible one of those memory units came from the bus in 1983. As implausible as it sounded, the scenario wasn't impossible. A team of engineers was hired to analyze the raw data. They reconstructed the journey minute by minute, turn by turn. The result was an unofficial map leading to a forested branch north of Silvercap Lake, the same area previously excluded from the search for being outside the reasonable radius. On May 22, 2023, a civilian survey team was granted access to that area, and within just 2 hours they found something. A small depression in the earth, curved in shape, about 6 meters long, covered in thin moss, as if something very heavy had once pressed down and later withdrawn after many years. Nearby, between two intersecting pine trunks, a piece of metal was discovered. The yellow paint had faded, but the primer beneath bore a manufacturing code exclusive to the Bluebird line from 1982 to 1983. Carbon dating of the moss confirmed the growth was over 35 years old. Right beside it, the team also found a 60-minute cassette tape, the outer shell cracked, wrapped in an old plastic bag. There was no label, but upon playback, one fragment of audio remained audible. The sound of a bus running, footsteps clicking, and at the 38th second, a soft voice, likely a boy's, saying, "Why are we taking this road?" The voice matched the vocal sample of Dannel Vireo, verified from recordings made before the incident. With all data combined, an official excavation campaign was launched in June. But what astonished the entire team was this. There was no bus beneath the earth, no frame, no axles, no glass windows. Instead, they discovered a perfectly arched depression, the base lined with neatly arranged small stones, as if someone had shaped the area to fit the bus, buried something, and then taken it back. And at the center of that hollow, gently placed atop the stones, was a soft leather purple notebook, its cover faded. Inside, one handwritten line still faintly legible. "Not every place wants to be found." That notebook belonged to Ionie Talbert. The final page was a small hand-drawn map with 3 words marked at a turn. "Took the wrong turn." But what caught the investigators' attention was the ink used for that line. A pale green ballpoint ink that was only manufactured from 1999 onward. The only clearly legible sentence on the back cover, written in newer handwriting with a slight slant. "Not everyone who leaves is lost. Some return, just to mend the road." The small room in the Benton County Sheriff's Office was filled with the dim glow of a desk lamp. In front of Sheriff Mara Quillen lay the purple leather notebook, placed on the table like the final witness to a disappearance that had lasted 4 decades. The notebook and the newly uncovered clues did not merely reopen the lost journey, but revealed a troubling truth. The bus had not vanished due to a routine accident, but had been led down a wrong path. One not found on any official map, bound by deliberate decisions and secrets never brought to light. Through the yellowed pages, the journey of the 9 students and driver Marlon Deek did not end in a tragic crash as long believed. Instead, they had been led into a deep forested region, a forgotten place where the bus was hidden in a strangely shaped earthen pit and their story buried under a heavy silence. This journey had been guarded by the silence of the community itself, those responsible or aware of the irregularities, yet choosing to keep it concealed, perhaps out of fear, pressure, or reasons still unknown. Dannel's tape recorder, Ionie's notebook, the data fragments from a modern truck's black box. All were scattered puzzle pieces slowly uncovered, forming a complex picture of a disappearance not born of chance. The final pages of the notebook, with green ballpoint ink not from the time of the incident, read like a message from the future asserting, "Not everyone who leaves is lost. Some return, just to mend the road." Someone among the missing had chosen to come back, not to reappear among the living, but to leave a sign, a way for future generations to know they had not been forgotten. Sheriff Quillen sat in silence for a long while, gazing out the window, where the sun began to set behind the old pine trees. Below in the valley, the bus RWP-0835 remained, not beneath earth and stone, but in memory and in the hearts of those who remembered. A hollow in the ground was never the true ending. At the home of Mrs. Tasia Talbert, the purple cloths were gently taken down, not to forget, but to make room for a small wooden sign placed on the windowsill. "We have heard, we have remembered." The story of the 9 students and the driver who vanished in 1983, with all its silence, its traces and its fragments, was no longer a hopeless mystery. It had become a reminder of persistence, of memories that never die, and of journeys that, though lost, can still find their way back to the light. If you found this story meaningful, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because there are still many disappearances that have never been told.